Are there other questions? While you are thinking of questions, I am going to tell you how Colgate got its name. You may, of course, recognize that the name of my university is the same as a toothpaste. And many people call it Toothpaste U. Where did it get this strange name? So let me tell you. To begin with, Colgate University was a Methodist theological seminary. So it just trained pastors and ministers for the church. At a certain point, this was Colgate is quite an old university, so this was at the beginning of the 19th century. At a certain point, the university decided that it needed more money to expand, and it went around asking for money and got a very, very large donation from the Colgate-Palmolive company, who make the toothpaste. They asked that their name be put on the university, and it was. However, there was a bit of a problem towards the end of the 19th century because Colgate decided to teach other subjects besides theology. The Colgate-Palmolive company was outraged. They said, we gave money to a seminary. We don't want to have our name attached to a regular university. So the seminary went someplace else. It has the Colgate, it's called the Colgate Rochester Seminary, but the university, Colgate, kept the name of the toothpaste, even though the family didn't want it to. Okay, so, and just to give you an idea, Colgate is 200 years old. That's quite old for an American university. I think the oldest universities in the United States are Harvard and the University of Charleston, South Carolina, both of which I believe date from the end of the 17th century. So not so different from, let's say, MGU or other institutions of that kind in Russia. So are there other questions? You have to practice participate,
I
right?
have a question. You say that there's no public transportation, so uh, the only way we can get to the city is call for a taxi car, yes?
Good question. Yes and no. Okay, so a number of Colgate students, especially those who pay for their own tuition without any help, that's more than half of the students, come from quite wealthy families, and many of them come to campus with their own cars. So you can drive to a big city. The closest one is Syracuse, New York. It's not all that big, 500,000, maybe, less than that, I think. There is the university runs an on-demand service so that you can book a ride to the train station or the airport, which are not in Hamilton, New York. They're in the bigger cities around. And there is a little bus that runs around the village that is also run by the university. But yes, you're right. You can rent a car very inexpensively for just a few hours and come back. But if you want to go to one of the cities, it really becomes very expensive if you, for example, call a taxi. A taxi to Syracuse, New York costs more than $100. So not very many people do that, as you can imagine. What they do is they ask their friends for a ride in their cars. That's the most common thing to get to a big city. We call ourselves equifar, meaning we're equally far away from big cities. So it is 5 hours driving to New York City, 5 hours driving to Philadelphia, 5 hours driving to Boston, 5 hours driving to Montreal in Canada, and 5 hours driving to Toronto in Canada. But again, no public transportation from the university. You can get on a train or a plane in Syracuse, for example. So very good question.
Thank you.
Sure.
So for an international student who, for example, cannot drive a car, just
Right.
ask other students or pay a
Yes.
lot of money to taxis?
Well, no, I mean, this is part of having this community of students. You ask one of your friends who has a car, are you going to Syracuse? Can I have a ride? Or you say, let's all go to Syracuse and go shopping, for example. Okay.
Okay,
That's,
thank you.
that's sort of how it works. But as I said, you can actually pay Colgate University for a ride to the airport or to the train, and it's much less expensive than if you get a taxi or an Uber, for example.
Okay, thank you. I got
Sure,
it.
absolutely. There are a lot of students who don't have driver's licenses. It's not just international students who don't have driver's licenses. It's if you live in the center of New York City, for example, there's no point in having a driver's license. You're not going to drive, you're going to use public transportation, just like in Moscow.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, may I ask another question?
Sure.
Uh, I wonder if you have like any international programs with maybe universities abroad. I understand that you probably don't have any programs with Russian universities, but with like maybe European universities.
Okay, very good question. I really should have spoken about this. So Colgate does not very often do exchange programs. That is, they don't send their students to another university. What they do is they have things called study groups. Okay, so I, for example, took 15 Colgate students for one semester to study in London. We all lived in London. We listened to lectures and went to plays and things like that, that as instructed by British professors, but the students did not attend a British university. There are lots of these programs. So there is a semester away that studies at this one is at the University of Dijon for students to learn to speak French better. There is a study semester away at the University of Freiburg for students to learn to speak German better. There used to be some in Moscow, but they no longer exist, as you can imagine. The reason for doing this way is very strange, okay? That is, British universities grade very differently than Colgate does. So the reason that Colgate keeps its students separate is because they want the professor that accompanies the students to translate the grades into something that is similar to what Colgate does, so that students can go away and do a semester away without harming their grades. This might sound very odd, but that's the way we do it. We also have study abroad trips. For example, a colleague and I went with 18 students and traveled around Uzbekistan for 4 weeks, something like that. Another group of students, again, in the past, another group of students traveled through Siberia with an American professor from Colgate University. Other students go to South Africa for short trips. So there's a lot of what is called study abroad, but there's not very much direct exchange. Students are perfectly welcome, of course, to apply to the University of Edinburgh and go there for a semester or a year on their own, but that's not an exchange that is organized by Colgate University. So as you can tell, Colgate is it's very careful to take care of its students in a way that Americans would recognize. I think they overdo it a bit, but that's my opinion. The study abroad's great fun, though.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. I have to say that another one of the study abroad that I did was I went with students for 4 months to Geneva, and we spent time looking at different kinds of international organizations. We had a professor who was from the United Nations who taught a class. I taught a class. We did a lot of traveling to Strasbourg to look at the European Union buildings and take a tour there, and so on and so forth. Okay, but you can see there's a huge variety of them, and what is truly remarkable, I guess, is that the students who go on these actually don't pay anything extra. It's very costly to do this kind of thing, but this is one of the things that Colgate uses its money for. Anything else you can think of here? It might be interesting to know about Colgate's relationship with the village of Hamilton, where it finds itself. Okay, the village is very dependent on Colgate University for its prosperity. Many of the professors live in Hamilton, and the village is very careful not to offend Colgate. This is not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes students are allowed to do things that no ordinary citizen would be allowed to do. The thing that makes it the most difficult, the relationship, is that Colgate is a not-for-profit institution. That means that it doesn't pay any taxes to the village of Hamilton. And in fact, it occupies a huge chunk of the village of Hamilton. So Colgate tries to give back some things to the village instead of paying taxes, so that it organizes massive fireworks on the 4th of July. Personally, I think that Colgate would, I think the village would rather have the money than fireworks, but that's the way it goes.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, please? Well, my question is, well, the university is not very large. There are about 3,000 students all in all. But, well, at the same time, well, what about the number of professors? Because, well, the number of disciplines that are taught about, you said 55 different disciplines are taught at the university.
Right.
Well, how about the expertise of the professor? And well, and what about the number of the professor that probably, well, it doesn't exceed the number of the students, of course, well, but probably is very, very close to that.
No, there are 450 professors.
450 professors, but well, you mentioned that there are 55 different disciplines that are taught.
Right.
55. Well, that is quite a number. It is a huge number of different disciplines. Well, and well, do they teach? Some of them teach well 2 subjects or 3 subjects. Well, how is that?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I can give you an example. A colleague of mine who was originally hired into Russian literature, he became very interested in ecology and the relationship between ecology and the way it's portrayed in literature, not just Russian literature, all literature. And so he now teaches in the specialty called ecology, as well as teaching second-year Russian language, for example. Okay.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. And then still another very important question. What about donations? You stressed that there are a lot of donations that come to Colgate University. And who donates? Who are the donators who are so kind and who keep up the fame and the expertise of the university?
Well, so first of all, about the international students, I think the largest single group of international students come from China. but they are certainly not the only ones. There's a very diverse group of international students, some from South America, some but not very many from Europe. So there's quite a diversity of international students. Some of them have scholarships, some of them do not. As to donations, it really very much depends. So one of Colgate's graduates, I think in the 1940s, right? His name was Jiming Ho. He was an American Chinese ethnicity, but an American citizen. He went on to become exceedingly famous in the manufacture of scientific instruments, I believe. He owns a company who does that, or he did. He's now no longer with us. But he was, for example, right? He gave Colgate University 3 new buildings.
Oh, really?
He paid for 3 buildings. And there are other examples of that kind. And of course, many people just give, relatively speaking, small sums of money. Quite often when students graduate, they get together their final year and they give a gift from the whole class to the university. So sometimes each member of the class is asked to give $100 or $200. But there are almost 1,000 students in every class, so it's not nothing. And I'm sure that nobody has to pay that if they don't want to or if they can't. So there's a wide range of things, and Colgate keeps this idea going because it has something called reunions every summer. So the first weekend in July, all former Colgate students are invited to come back to campus and get together. So people call their friends and say, "Are you going?" And of course, one of the things that happens when you get there, there's a football game. There are all kinds of celebrations and picnics. And of course, Colgate asks everybody if they wouldn't like to donate some money.
Oh, yes, of course, yes. Well, yeah.
And part of the reason that Colgate is so careful not to offend the students' parents is because the students' parents are also very wealthy, and if some of them, and if they like what their student does, they might donate some money. So don't offend them.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions, please? Well, I think this is the last question about fraternities. You said that, fraternities are something on the national scale. Well, I don't quite understand. Fraternity is some group of people who have settled down in some particular university, Colgate University, for example. But, what about the national scale that you mentioned? Why? Why is it is something with this particular perspective?
Yeah, okay. So the fraternities have a national office that's not a part of any university. And they ask students at Colgate, would you like to open a chapter, a house for the deeks, which is the Greek letter Delta Kappa Epsilon? Would you like to have a chapter at Colgate? And then maybe, would the University of Michigan like to have a chapter? And this way they have representatives in many different universities. But as I said, not all universities want them. Some of them find fraternities in particular to be quite destructive of an academic atmosphere on some campuses. So, and they don't care for their behavior sometimes. So I used to teach, for example, at Bowdoin College before I came to Colgate, and Bowdoin outlawed fraternities. They just said, none on this campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think, well, we should call it a day and at this point. And thank you very much, Professor, for this absolutely enlightening lecture. And we now know not only about Colgate University, but generally about the life of students on the university grounds and what it looks like. Thank you very much indeed. And probably, well, if you don't mind, we would like to address you again, well, in the second term of the current school year. And you'll be so kind as to tell us something else about American universities. Thank you very much indeed. It was most and full of enthusiasm and enlightening. Thank you very much indeed. And goodbye at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you all for your attention. I look
Thank you.
forward to the next time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. But goodbye.
you.